The teenager ran out from the kitchen of a restaurant, shouting loudly that the food had been poisoned. No one wanted to listen to him, but the millionaire decided to stop and hear him out. The next day, he showed up at the boy's doorstep. The early morning sunlight crept through the worn curtains of the small apartment, casting soft shadows on the kitchen counter where James stood, his tall, lanky frame bent over the stove. At 15, his dark skin glistened with a thin sheen of sweat from the heat of cooking. The young boy's intelligent eyes focused intently on the eggs sizzling in the pan as his nimble fingers sprinkled the last bits of salt and pepper. The sound of keys turning in the lock made him look up, a warm smile spreading across his face. Eleanor stepped inside, her cleaning uniform still on from her night shift at the hospital. Her hands were rough and reddened from hours of scrubbing and disinfecting, and exhaustion lined her face after working 2 jobs, cleaning at both the hospital and the evening shift at a restaurant. Despite her weariness, her eyes lit up at the sight of her son cooking breakfast. "Morning, Mom," James said softly, sliding the perfectly cooked eggs onto a plate. "I made coffee too, and there's still some bread left from yesterday that I toasted." Eleanor dropped her heavy bag by the door and crossed the small space to wrap her arms around her son. Even though he now stood taller than her, she still saw the little boy who needed her protection. "You didn't have to get up so early, baby. You need your rest too." "I wanted to," James replied simply, guiding her to sit at their small table. "You're working so hard with both jobs. Let me take care of you for a change." Eleanor's eyes misted over as she watched her son move confidently around their tiny kitchen. His lean frame reminded her so much of his father, but his gentle spirit was all his own. "The hospital floors needed extra attention tonight," she said, taking a grateful sip of the coffee. "And then the restaurant was so busy. My whole body aches." James listened intently, his dark eyes full of concern and admiration. He'd always been proud of his mother's strength, working 2 cleaning jobs to keep their small family afloat. "You're amazing, Mom," he said quietly, sitting down beside her with his own. "I don't know how you do it all." Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze his hand, her tired eyes warm with love. "The same way you managed to be both a student and my personal chef. One day at a time, baby. One day at a time." On the small kitchen table, beneath the dim light of their single overhead lamp, lay a scattered collection of bills and notices that told the story of their struggle. The electricity bill peeked out from beneath a water notice, both stamped with bold red past due, warnings that seemed to glare up at anyone who looked their way. At the center of this troubling display sat their latest rent notice, the 3rd one this month, its formal language doing little to soften the urgent message within. James had watched his mother sort through these papers the night before, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she separated them into piles, those that absolutely had to be paid and those that would have to wait. The eviction warning had gone into the first pile, its presence casting a shadow over their carefully maintained home. Even with her 2 cleaning jobs at the hospital and the restaurant, Eleanor could barely keep up with the mounting costs of living in New York. The numbers didn't lie, and each month the gap between income and expenses seemed to grow wider, like a chasm threatening to swallow their modest dreams of stability. Looking at those papers now in the morning light, James felt the familiar weight of worry settle in his chest. He knew his mother was doing everything she could, working herself to exhaustion, just to keep their small world from crumbling. That was why he had decided to find work himself. Even a dishwashing job could help ease the burden, if only a little. After school, James would make his way to Le Bernardin, the prestigious French restaurant where he spent his evenings in the dish room. The steam rose around him as he worked, his tall frame bent over the industrial sink, hands moving quickly through the endless stream of expensive china and crystal glasses. Each plate he handled cost more than what he earned in a week, but he treated them with the same care and precision he'd learned from watching his mother maintain their modest home. The kitchen was a world of its own, a symphony of clattering pots, sizzling pans, and sharp commands thrown across the busy space in multiple languages. While his corner was far from the glamour of the main kitchen, the aromas of fine cuisine still found their way to him: delicate sauces, perfectly seared meats, fresh herbs, and exotic spices. These smells were a daily reminder of a world so different from his own, where single dishes cost what his mother earned in several hours of cleaning. His weekly paycheck wasn't much minimum wage for 5 hours each weeknight, but James knew every dollar mattered. The money helped with groceries, sometimes the electric bill, and occasionally allowed his mother to rest instead of taking an extra cleaning shift. He kept his earnings in a small envelope, carefully counted and tucked away in their shared bedroom, ready for whatever emergency might arise. Sometimes, when the rush of dishes slowed, James would steal glances at the chefs working their stations. He watched their confident movements, the way they transformed raw ingredients into works of art. While his hands were submerged in soapy water, his mind absorbed every detail: the way they held their knives, how they tasted and adjusted seasonings, their quiet discussions about technique and timing. Even from his humble position, he was learning, dreaming, hoping. The work was exhausting, especially after a full day of school, but James never complained. Each night, as he dried his hands and hung up his apron, he thought of his mother, probably still cleaning at the hospital or the other restaurant. His aching back and pruned fingers were nothing compared to her sacrifices. Besides, there was something satisfying about looking at the clean, organized dish room at the end of his shift, a small echo of the dignity his mother maintained in their own home, despite all odds. On the small kitchen table, beneath the dim light of their single overhead lamp, lay a scattered collection of bills and notices that told the story of their struggle. The electricity bill peeked out from beneath a water notice, both stamped with bold red "past due," warnings that seemed to glare up at anyone who looked their way. At the center of this troubling display sat their latest rent notice, the third one this month, its formal language doing little to soften the urgent message within. James had watched his mother sort through these papers the night before, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she separated them into piles: those that absolutely had to be paid and those that would have to wait. The eviction warning had gone into the first pile, its presence casting a shadow over their carefully maintained home. Even with her 2 cleaning jobs at the hospital and the restaurant, Eleanor could barely keep up with the mounting costs of living in New York. The numbers didn't lie, and each month the gap between income and expenses seemed to grow wider, like a chasm threatening to swallow their modest dreams of stability. The kitchen of Le Petit Jardin was unusually busy that evening. Everyone knew that William Crawford, one of the richest men in New York, was coming for dinner. He owned many famous restaurants, and his opinion mattered a lot. "Check everything twice," Chef Maurice called out to his staff. "Mr. Crawford is a very important guest. We cannot make any mistakes tonight." The chef moved quickly around the kitchen, tasting each sauce and inspecting every dish. James stood in his corner by the big sinks, washing dishes like he did every evening. Even though he was just a dishwasher, he could feel how nervous everyone was. He'd heard about Crawford from the other workers, a businessman who started at the bottom like James, washing dishes, but now owned restaurants all over the city. The kitchen staff worked differently tonight. Usually they would joke and chat while cooking, but now everyone was quiet and serious. The cooks checked their recipes carefully. The pastry chef made sure every dessert looked perfect. Even the head waiters seemed worried, practicing how they would serve the special guest. 30 minutes until Mr. Crawford arrives, Chef Maurice announced. His voice was tense. Every plate must be perfect before it leaves this kitchen. James kept washing dishes, making sure each plate was extra clean and shiny. He knew that even his simple job was important tonight. Everything in the restaurant had to be perfect for Mr. Crawford's visit. As the first dinner orders started coming in, James worked faster. He knew there would be many more dishes soon. From his quiet spot in the corner, he watched the kitchen prepare for what everyone hoped would be a perfect dinner service. "How's this?" The language is simpler and more direct while still capturing the atmosphere of anticipation in the kitchen. "Would you like me to adjust anything or move on to the next section?" While washing dishes, James noticed Lucas, the new kitchen helper, moving strangely near the soup station. Lucas had only started working at the restaurant last week, and something about him had always seemed off. The kitchen was still busy preparing for Mr. Crawford's arrival. Most of the staff were focused on their own tasks, but James could see everything from his corner. He watched as Lucas glanced around nervously, making sure no one was looking his way. "Everything okay with the soup?" Lucas, the sous chef, called out as she passed by. "Yes, chef." "Just checking the temperature," Lucas answered quickly, pretending to stir the pot. But as soon as the sous chef walked away, his behavior changed again. James slowed his dishwashing, keeping his eyes on Lucas. Something wasn't right. Lucas was standing too close to the pot, his movements too careful, too secretive. Then James saw it. Lucas's hand slipped into his pocket. The movement was quick and smooth, like he'd practiced it. From his pocket, Lucas pulled out a small glass bottle filled with white powder. James's heart began to beat faster. This definitely wasn't a normal ingredient from the kitchen. Looking around one more time, Lucas quickly unscrewed the bottle's cap. His hands were steady as he held it over the soup pot. James could barely believe what he was seeing. Mr. Crawford's special soup was being prepared in that very pot. With a quick flick of his wrist, Lucas emptied the powder into the soup. He stirred it quickly, making sure it dissolved completely. The whole thing took less than 10 seconds. If James hadn't been watching carefully, he would have missed it. Lucas tucked the empty bottle back into his pocket and stepped away from the pot, acting as if nothing had happened. He picked up a knife and started chopping vegetables, blending in with the other kitchen staff. James stood frozen by the sink, his hands still holding a half-washed plate. He had just watched someone put something strange into Mr. Crawford's food. But what was it? And why? His mind raced with questions as he tried to decide what to do next. Time was running out. Dinner service would start soon, and that soup would be served to Mr. Crawford. James knew he had to act fast, but he also knew that no one might believe a simple dishwasher. James wiped his wet hands on his apron and hurried through the busy kitchen. His heart was pounding, but he knew he had to tell someone about what he'd just seen. Mr. Parker, the restaurant manager, was standing near the dining room entrance, checking the table settings for Mr. Crawford's arrival. "Mr. Parker," James called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to talk to you. It's important." The manager barely glanced at him. "Not now, James. We're extremely busy," he continued, adjusting the silverware on the nearest table. "But sir, it's about Lucas. I saw him put something in the soup. Something from a small bottle." James followed Mr. Parker as he moved to the next table. This caught the manager's attention. He turned around, looking annoyed. "What are you talking about?" "In the kitchen, just now. Lucas had this bottle with white powder. He put it in Mr. Crawford's soup when he thought nobody was watching." James spoke quickly, afraid he'd lose the manager's attention. Mr. Parker sighed heavily. "James, Lucas is a certified kitchen helper. You're a dishwasher. Are you sure you're not just imagining things?" "No, sir. I saw it clearly. He was acting strange, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Please, you have to check the soup." James could hear the desperation in his own voice. "Listen," Mr. Parker said firmly. "We're about to serve one of the most important guests this restaurant has ever had. I don't have time for wild stories. Lucas has references from other restaurants. You probably saw him adding seasoning or thickener to the soup. But..." "Enough," Mr. Parker cut him off. "Get back to your station. Those dishes won't wash themselves." James stood there for a moment, watching Mr. Parker walk away. His stomach felt tight with worry. Nobody was going to listen to him. He was just the dishwasher, after all. Walking back to the kitchen, he passed the soup station. The pot was still simmering, steam rising gently from its surface. Lucas was nowhere to be seen. James stopped and stared at the pot, his mind racing. What should he do? He couldn't just let Mr. Crawford eat that soup, but no one would believe him. The kitchen clock showed 7:15. Mr. Crawford would arrive any minute now. James returned to his sink, but he couldn't focus on the dishes. He kept looking at the soup pot, then at the dining room entrance, then back at the pot again. "I have to do something," he whispered to himself. "Even if I get fired, I can't let someone get hurt." He watched as the sous chef started ladling the soup into elegant bowls, adding the final garnish. The waiters were lining up, ready to serve the first course. Time was running out. James dried his hands again and took a deep breath. If the manager wouldn't listen, maybe he needed to warn Mr. Crawford directly. It would be breaking all the rules about staff staying in the kitchen. but he couldn't think of any other way. "I'll probably lose my job," he thought, "but at least no one will get hurt." He straightened his apron and gathered his courage. He had decided he would have to stop this himself, no matter what the consequences might be. The dining room doors swung open as the first guests began to arrive. James knew what he had to do. Now he just had to find the courage to do it. From his corner by the sinks, James watched everything unfold, like a slow-motion scene in a movie. The kitchen's usual noises seemed muffled now. Even the clatter of dishes in his hands felt distant. His entire focus was on the soup station. Chef Maurice was adding the final touches to the contaminated soup, completely unaware of what Lucas had done. He sprinkled fresh herbs on top, adjusting them with careful precision. "Perfect," the chef murmured, stepping back to admire his work. "This will impress Mr. Crawford." James's hands trembled slightly as he dried another plate. He couldn't take his eyes off the soup bowls being lined up on the serving counter. Each one was a pristine white, like fresh snow, waiting to be filled. The sous chef began ladling the soup with elegant movements, making sure each portion was exactly the same size. "First course in 5 minutes," called out the dining room manager, poking his head through the kitchen doors. The announcement sent a fresh wave of activity through the kitchen. Waiters in crisp black uniforms lined up, ready to serve. James glanced at the clock on the wall, 7:28 p.m. His heart was racing now. Mr. Crawford had arrived 10 minutes ago, and soon he would be served the soup. The thought made James's stomach twist with anxiety. Service. The call came from the head waiter. The first round of soups was ready to go out. James watched as the waiters moved forward in practiced formation, each carefully lifting their assigned bowls. The steam rising from the soup bowls seemed ominous now. James noticed how beautiful they looked, the creamy liquid garnished with fresh herbs and a drizzle of olive oil. No one would suspect anything was wrong. That's what scared him the most. "Second round, prepare," Chef Maurice called out. More bowls were being filled. The serving line moved with practiced efficiency, like a well-oiled machine. James could see Lucas in the background, pretending to be busy with prep work, but occasionally glancing at the soup service. The kitchen doors swung open and closed as waiters moved in and out. Through the brief glimpses of the dining room, James could see the elegant table settings, the soft lighting, and the important guests in their fine clothes. Mr. Crawford's table was just visible, the man himself sitting at the head, engaged in conversation. James dried his hands on his apron for the 100th time. They felt clammy with nervousness. The clock showed 7:32 p.m. now. The first round of soup would be reaching the tables. His heart pounded so hard he was sure others must be able to hear it. "Mr. Crawford's table, ready for service," announced the head waiter. This was at the moment James had been dreading. He watched as the specially garnished bowls were arranged on a serving tray. They looked perfect, dangerous in their beauty. The waiter lifted the tray with practiced ease, heading for the kitchen doors. Each step they took was one step closer to disaster. James gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles turning white. Time seemed to slow down even further. He knew he had to make a decision right now. Either he could stay quiet and let events unfold, or he could act. The weight of that choice pressed down on him like a physical thing. The kitchen doors swung open one more time, and James made his choice. The waiter moved gracefully across the dining room, carrying the elegant bowl of soup toward Mr. Crawford's table. James watched from the kitchen doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. In those few seconds, time seemed to slow down as he saw the waiter carefully place the bowl in front of Mr. Crawford. "Stop!" James's voice exploded through the quiet dining room, shocking everyone into silence. "Don T, eat the soup!" His shout echoed off the walls, bouncing back with desperate urgency. Without hesitation, James burst through the dining room, his footsteps thundering against the polished floor. "Please, Don T, touch it!" he shouted again, his voice cracking with desperation. "The soup isn't tea safe." The other diners turned in their seats, startled by the sudden commotion. James could see Mr. Crawford lifting his spoon, about to take his first taste. "Please stop!" he called out again, even louder this time. His voice reverberated off the restaurant's high ceiling, demanding attention. Several things happened at once. The restaurant security guards started moving toward him from their posts near the entrance. Mr. Parker, the manager, emerged from behind a serving station, his face reddening with anger. Waiters stopped in their tracks, holding their trays, unsure what to do. "Someone put something in the soup." James's voice rang out clear and strong, even as he dodged between tables. Each word punctuated the air like a thunderclap. "I saw them do it. Please, you can eat it." The security guards were closing in now. "Hey kid, stop right there," one of them called out. James could hear their heavy footsteps behind him, but he didn't dare look back. He had to reach Mr. Crawford's table before it was too late. Mr. Crawford slowly lowered his spoon, looking up at the commotion heading his way. His dinner companions sat frozen, their own spoons suspended in midair. The whole dining room seemed to hold its breath. "Young man, stop this instant!" Mr. Parker's voice rang out sharply. But James kept moving forward, even as he felt the security guard's hand brush against his shoulder, trying to grab him. "It's not safe," James shouted one final time, his voice echoing through the now silent dining room. He was only a few feet from Mr. Crawford's table now. Every eye in the restaurant was fixed on him, the dishwasher in his dirty apron, causing such a scene in this elegant setting. The security guards finally caught up, each taking hold of one of his arms. James didn't struggle against them, but he kept his eyes locked on Mr. Crawford. "Please," he said, softer now but still urgent, "don't eat it. I saw them put something in it." The entire dining room had fallen silent. The soft background music seemed suddenly loud in the quiet. Diners sat still in their chairs, watching the scene unfold. The only sound was the gentle clink of glasses being set down as everyone turned to stare. Mr. Crawford sat back in his chair, studying James with interest. The soup bowl steamed quietly in front of him, looking perfectly innocent. James could feel sweat trickling down his back. The guard's grip hadn't loosened, and his arms were starting to ache. Still, he kept his eyes fixed on Mr. Crawford, silently pleading with him to understand, to believe. From somewhere in the kitchen came the sound of a pan clattering to the floor, making several diners jump. The noise seemed to break the spell of silence. Whispers began to ripple through the dining room. "Who is that boy? What's happening? Should we leave?" Mr. Parker stepped forward, his face a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Mr. Crawford, I sincerely apologize for this disruption. This boy is just a dishwasher, and I assure you he will be dealt with." "A dishwasher," Mr. Crawford repeated thoughtfully, his voice carrying clearly through the room. He was still looking at James, his eyes sharp and intelligent. The whispers died down again as people waited to hear what he would say next. The elegant chandeliers cast soft shadows across the dining room. Outside, the evening traffic of New York hummed distantly. The tension in the room seemed to grow with each passing second, as everyone waited to see how this dramatic interruption would end. The silence in the dining room was palpable as all eyes turned to Mr. Crawford. The elegant businessman slowly lowered his spoon back into the steaming bowl of soup, his gaze fixed on the young dishwasher being restrained by the security guards. "Young man, you claim there is something wrong with my soup." Mr. Crawford's voice was calm, but there was a hint of steel underlying his words. "I must insist that you explain yourself." James swallowed hard, feeling the guard's grip tighten on his arms. Please, sir. I saw one of the kitchen staff, Lucas, put something into the soup. A white powder from a bottle. I'm afraid he may have contaminated it." At this, the head chef, Maurice, stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "That's preposterous. Lucas is a certified kitchen professional with excellent references. How dare you make such an accusation?" "But I saw him do it," James insisted, his voice rising in desperation. He was acting suspicious, looking around to make sure no one was watching. "Please, you have to check the soup." Mr. Crawford raised a hand, silencing the chef. "Very well, let us examine the soup more closely." He turned to one of the waiters. "Bring me a fresh sample, if you would." The waiter hurried to the kitchen, returning moments later with a small bowl of the soup. Mr. Crawford studied it carefully, swirling the liquid and inspecting the color and texture. His brow furrowed as he detected a subtle difference from the usual presentation. "This does seem unusual," he murmured, more to himself than the others. Turning to the manager, he said. "I believe we should have the authorities take a closer look. This is a serious matter that requires investigation." The manager nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Of course, Mr. Crawford. I'll call the police immediately." He hurried away, leaving the diners in stunned silence. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the kitchen as Lucas burst through the doors, his eyes wild with panic. He shoved past the security guards, knocking one of them to the ground, and made a desperate dash for the exit. "Stop him," Mr. Crawford shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The remaining guards sprang into action, chasing after the fleeing kitchen worker. James watched, his heart pounding, as Lucas sprinted across the dining room, dodging between tables and terrified diners. The guards were closing in, their heavy footsteps echoing through the suddenly silent space. With a last-ditch effort, Lucas hurled himself toward the exit, but the guards were too quick. They tackled him to the ground just steps from the door, pinning him down as he thrashed and cursed. The manager returned, his face flushed with exertion. "The police are on their way," he announced, his gaze fixed on the struggling Lucas. "This man will be detained until they arrive." Mr. Crawford nodded, his expression grim. "See that he does not escape. I want a full accounting of his actions." He turned to James, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "And you, young man, I believe deserve a chance to explain yourself." James felt a surge of relief, but also trepidation. He knew his job was likely on the line, and he couldn't help but wonder what other consequences might arise from his actions. Still, he was grateful that someone was finally taking his concerns seriously. As the manager returned with the promise of the police's imminent arrival, the tension in the room only grew. James could feel the weight of every pair of eyes upon him, waiting to see how this dramatic situation would unfold. With the police now on their way, the dining room slowly began to regain a sense of calm. As the security guards hauled the struggling Lucas away, Mr. Crawford rose from his seat and made his way towards James. The young dishwasher felt his heart racing as the imposing businessman approached. He braced himself, fully expecting to be reprimanded or even fired on the spot. But to his surprise, Mr. Crawford's expression was not one of anger, but rather a thoughtful curiosity. "Young man," the older man began, his voice measured and even, "you have shown remarkable courage in bringing this matter to our attention. I must commend you for your vigilance and quick thinking." James blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected praise. I was just trying to do the right thing, sir," he stammered, his gaze dropping to the pristine white tablecloth. Mr. Crawford nodded slowly. "Indeed. And that is precisely why I wish to speak with you further." He gestured to a nearby empty table. "If you would join me for a moment, I have some questions I'd like to ask." Unsure of what to expect, James allowed the security guards to release their grip on his arms. He followed Mr. Crawford to the small table, taking the seat opposite the older man. "Tell me, young man," Mr. Crawford began, his penetrating gaze fixed on James, "what is your name, and how did you come to be working in my restaurant's kitchen?" James swallowed nervously, suddenly feeling very self-conscious in his plain, stained uniform. My name is James, sir, and I work here as a dishwasher, after school and on the weekends." I see. Mr. Crawford's brow furrowed slightly. "And your home life, what can you tell me about that?" Hesitantly, James began to open up, sharing the story of his and his mother's struggle to make ends meet. He spoke of Eleanor's long hours, working 2 cleaning jobs to support them, and how James had taken the dishwashing position to help ease the burden. "My mother, she works so hard," James said, his voice tinged with a mixture of pride and sadness. "But even with both of our paychecks, it's still so difficult. The bills keep piling up, and sometimes he paused, his eyes downcast. "Sometimes we don't know how we'll make it through the month." Mr. Crawford listened intently, his expression softening with each word. "And what of your own dreams and aspirations, young James?" he asked gently. "I couldn't help but notice the way you were watching the chef's work earlier this evening." At this, James looked up, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. I want to be a chef, sir. Ever since I started working here, I've been fascinated by the way they transform ordinary ingredients into such beautiful and delicious meals." He shook his head ruefully. "I know it's just a fantasy, though. A dishwasher like me could never afford the training, let alone open his own restaurant." Mr. Crawford regarded the boy for a long moment, a contemplative look on his face. "Never say never, James," he said finally, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I believe you may have more opportunities ahead of you than you realize." James felt a surge of cautious optimism at the businessman's words. Could it be that Mr. Crawford, of all people, might be willing to help him pursue his culinary dreams? The thought was almost too much to dare believe. As the sound of sirens grew louder outside, signaling the police's imminent arrival, Mr. Crawford rose from his seat. "We shall speak more, James," he said, placing a hand briefly on the young man's shoulder. "But for now, I believe the authorities will want to have a word with you." James nodded, his mind racing with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Whatever happened next, he knew his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The next morning, there was another unexpected knock at the door of James and Eleanor's modest apartment. When Eleanor opened it, she was surprised to find Mr. Crawford standing there, this time holding a small wrapped package in his hands. "Mrs. Harris," Mr. Crawford greeted them warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to follow up from our conversation last night." He glanced down at the gift in his hands. "And to bring you both a small token of my appreciation." Eleanor and James exchanged a bewildered look, unsure of what to make of this unexpected visit. "Mr. Crawford, you really shouldn't have," Eleanor began, but the businessman raised a hand to stop her. "Please, I insist." Mr. Crawford stepped inside, his keen eyes taking in the modest apartment once more. "I know your situation is not an easy one, and I want you to know that I'm here to help in any way I can." Hesitantly, Eleanor accepted the package, her fingers tracing the delicate wrapping. "But why? Why are you doing this for us?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Mr. Crawford smiled kindly. "Because your son has shown me something truly remarkable, the courage to stand up for what is right, even in the face of adversity." He turned to James, who stood watching the exchange with wide eyes. "James, you put yourself at great risk to ensure the safety of my guests. That is the mark of a person with integrity, and it is something I wish to reward and nurture." Eleanor glanced over at her son, pride shining in her eyes. "But we can't possibly accept this," she protested, making a move to hand the package back. Mr. Crawford gently stopped her. "Mrs. Harris, please allow me to do this. I have an offer for both of you that I believe will change your lives for the better." Motioning for them to sit, Mr. Crawford explained his plan. "I would like to offer you, Eleanor, a position at one of my restaurants. The pay would be significantly higher than your current jobs, and the hours would be more reasonable as well." Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief. "But what about James?" she asked, clutching the wrapped gift tightly. "That's where the real opportunity lies," Mr. Crawford replied, his gaze shifting to the young man. "James, I want to sponsor your culinary education. I believe you have the talent and the drive to become an exceptional chef, and I want to give you the chance to pursue that dream." James felt a lump rise in his throat, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. You really mean that, sir?" he asked, scarcely daring to believe it. "I do," Mr. Crawford answered firmly. "With the proper training and mentorship, I have no doubt you can achieve greatness. All I ask in return is that you continue to show the same integrity and dedication that you displayed last night." Eleanor reached out to grasp Mr. Crawford's hand, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Oh, thank you, thank you. This is more than we could have ever dreamed of." As the mother and son embraced, Mr. Crawford smiled, knowing that he had found the perfect opportunity to change the course of their lives. This was not just an act of philanthropy, but an investment in the future and the dreams and aspirations of those who possess the courage to reach for something greater. The following day, Mr. Crawford returned to James and Eleanor's apartment, this time accompanied by a poised and elegant woman. "James, Eleanor," the businessman began, "I'd like to introduce you to Clara, one of the finest chefs I've had the privilege of working with. She will be overseeing your culinary education, James." Clara stepped forward, offering them a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you both. Mr. Crawford has told me all about your passion for cooking, James. I'm very much looking forward to helping you hone your skills." James felt a surge of excitement, but also a twinge of nervousness. "It's an honor to meet you, Ma," Amy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please call me Clara," she replied with a gentle nod. "I understand you've been working as a dishwasher at one of Mr. Crawford's restaurants." "Well, I can assure you, those days are over," she turned to Eleanor, her expression kind. "Mrs. Harris, your son is about to embark on a remarkable journey." Eleanor clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. I don't know what to say. This is all so overwhelming." Mr. Crawford placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Eleanor, I know this is a lot to take in, but I promise you, we have your family's best interests at heart. Clara will be guiding James through an intensive culinary program, one that will open doors to a future he's only dreamed of." Clara nodded, her gaze turning to James. "This won't be easy, young man. The training will be rigorous, and the standards will be high. But I believe you have the raw talent and the determination to succeed." James felt a lump rise in his throat, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom," he said, his voice trembling slightly. This is everything I've ever wanted." Eleanor reached out to squeeze her son's hand, a proud smile spreading across her face. "Oh, James, this is incredible. I can't believe this is happening." Mr. Crawford chuckled, clearly pleased with the family's reaction. "Well then, let's not waste any time. Clara, if you would be so kind as to take James through the program details." As Clara began outlining the comprehensive culinary curriculum, James listened with rapt attention, his eyes sparkling with newfound hope. This was a chance to turn his dreams into reality, to become the chef he had always aspired to be. Eleanor watched her son, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude. She had never dared to imagine that their lives could change so dramatically, all because of one young man's act of courage. "I promise, I won't let you down," James said, his voice filled with determination. "I'll work harder than anyone, I swear it." Mr. Crawford and Clara exchanged a satisfied glance, knowing that they had found the perfect candidate to invest in. With their guidance and support, James was about to embark on a journey that would forever alter the course of his life. The next morning, James awoke with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Today was the day he would begin his culinary training under the tutelage of Clara, the renowned chef Mr. Crawford had introduced him to just yesterday. As he made his way to the Crawford estate, James couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his life had taken this unexpected turn. Just a week ago, he had been a humble dishwasher, his dreams of becoming a chef seeming more like a distant fantasy than a realistic goal. But now, thanks to Mr. Crawford's generosity and faith in him, he was being given the chance of a lifetime. When he reached the grand gates, they swung open automatically, and James made his way up the long, winding driveway. The sprawling mansion loomed before him, a testament to the wealth and success of his newfound patron. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, James approached the front door and rang the bell. It was Clara herself who answered, her severe expression softening slightly as she greeted him. "James, right on time. Please come in." James followed her inside, his eyes widening as he took in the exquisite details of the entryway, the gleaming marble floors, the intricate moldings, the towering ceilings. This was a world away from the modest apartment he shared with his mother, and he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. "Now then," Clara said, leading him through the foyer and down a hallway lined with an impressive collection of gleaming copper pots and pans. "As I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Crawford has spoken very highly of your potential, and I'm eager to see what you're capable of." She ushered him into a kitchen that was nothing like the cramped, well-worn space James was used to at the restaurant. Every surface gleamed, and the walls were adorned with an array of the sharpest, most beautifully crafted knives he had ever seen. "Your first task," Clara said, gesturing to a large counter covered in an assortment of fresh produce, "is to properly wash and prepare these vegetables." James felt a surge of relief. This, at least, was familiar territory. He quickly tied on an apron and set to work, his nimble fingers making quick work of the leafy greens and crisp vegetables. As he chopped and sliced, he could feel Clara's watchful eyes studying his every move. "Interesting," she murmured, almost to herself. You have good knife skills for someone with no formal training." James paused, glancing up at her. I've had a lot of practice," he admitted, thinking of the countless hours he'd spent washing dishes at the restaurant. "Cleaning and preparing food is kind of second nature to me now." Clara nodded, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well, that's a good start. But there's much more to being a chef than just prep work." She stepped closer, her gaze intensely focused. "Show me how you handle a knife." Swallowing nervously, James picked up a gleaming French chef's knife, its weight unfamiliar in his hand. Carefully, he began to slice through a carrot, his movements slow and cautious at first. But as he found his rhythm, the knife seemed to move with an effortless grace, the slices falling with perfect uniformity. Clara observed silently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Not bad. But you have room for improvement." She gestured to a large cutting board. "Now, show me how you julienne these peppers." For the next hour, James worked tirelessly, his brow furrowing in concentration as Clara put him through a series of increasingly complex knife skills. Each time, she offered a quiet critique, guiding him gently but firmly toward perfection. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, Clara finally nodded in approval. "Well done, James. You've shown me that you have the raw talent and focus required. Now the real work begins." James felt a surge of pride, but also a twinge of trepidation. He knew that this was only the beginning of his culinary journey, and that the road ahead would be challenging. But with Clara's guidance and Mr. Crawford's support, he was determined to rise to the occasion. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice steady. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Clara regarded him for a moment, her expression softening. "I believe you are," she said simply. "Welcome to your new life, James. I look forward to seeing what you can accomplish." Over the next several weeks, James immersed himself in his culinary training under Clara's expert tutelage. Each day he arrived at the Crawford estate eager to learn, his mind sharp and his hands nimble. Clara began by honing his fundamental knife skills, guiding him through the proper techniques for a variety of cuts julienne, brunoise, chiffonade, and more. James practiced tirelessly, quickly gaining confidence as the knife became an extension of his hand. Clara would observe silently, offering the occasional gentle correction or encouragement. As James mastered the basic knife work, Clara moved on to teaching him the art of seasoning and flavor pairing. She would have him taste a variety of herbs, spices, and other ingredients, challenging him to describe the nuances of each. Then, she would task him with creating simple dishes, pushing him to balance the flavors with precision. "Taste as you go," Clara would remind him. The best chefs learn to trust their senses. James heeded her advice, meticulously recording his observations in the small notebook he had started carrying everywhere. He marveled at the complexity of the flavors, the way a dash of this or a pinch of that could transform a dish. Under Clara's watchful eye, his culinary vocabulary and intuition began to blossom. Gradually, as the weeks passed, Clara's critiques became less frequent. James could see the satisfaction in her eyes as he demonstrated his growing mastery of the fundamentals. Where once he had been hesitant and unsure, he now moved with a quiet confidence, his passion for the craft shining through. "You're a quick learner," James Clara remarked one day, a rare smile gracing her features. "I'm impressed by your dedication and attention to detail." James felt a surge of pride at her words, but knew there was still much to learn. As he gazed around the pristine kitchen, he was more determined than ever to make the most of this incredible opportunity. With Clara's guidance and Mr. Crawford's support, he was well on his way to realizing his culinary dreams. Over the next several weeks, James continued to hone his culinary skills under Clara's expert guidance. But one day, the young man received an unexpected invitation that would take his training to an entirely new level. "James, I have a very special opportunity for you," Mr. Crawford announced, a hint of excitement in his voice as he spoke with James and Eleanor. "How would you like to visit one of the finest restaurants in the city, a Michelin-starred establishment?" James felt his heart skip a beat. A Michelin-starred restaurant? He could scarcely believe it. These were the kinds of establishments he had only ever dreamed of, where the culinary elite plied their craft. I don't know what to say, sir," he stammered, his mind racing with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "That would be an incredible honor." Mr. Crawford smiled, clearly pleased by James' reaction. "Then it's settled. Clara and I will take you there this weekend so you can observe the kitchen in action." As the day approached, James found himself growing increasingly nervous. What if he didn't belong in such a rarefied environment? What if he embarrassed himself or failed to live up to the occasion? But Clara's reassuring presence and Mr. Crawford's unwavering confidence in him helped to ease his fears. When they arrived at the restaurant, James was immediately overwhelmed by the sense of grandeur and elegance that permeated every inch of the space. From the meticulously set tables to the impeccably dressed waitstaff, everything spoke of a level of refinement he had never before witnessed. Quietly, he followed Mr. Crawford and Clara through the kitchen doors, his eyes widening as he took in the frenetic energy of the kitchen. Chefs moved with practiced precision, orchestrating a symphony of sights, sounds, and aromas that threatened to overwhelm the senses. James watched, transfixed, as the culinary team assembled each dish with painstaking care. Every element was placed with the utmost attention to detail, creating works of art that were as visually stunning as they were delicious. He marveled at the way the chefs handled their tools, the rhythmic motions of their knives, the delicate touches that transformed the most ordinary ingredients into extraordinary creations. Gradually, James began to pick up on the subtle nuances, the way a particular seasoning was applied, the precise timing of each step, the meticulous plating that turned a simple dish into a masterpiece. He couldn't help but be in awe of the level of skill and discipline required to operate at this level. As they made their way back to the Crawford estate, James found himself brimming with a newfound sense of determination. Seeing firsthand the heights that could be achieved in the culinary world had ignited a fire within him, a burning desire to one day reach that same level of excellence. "Thank you, sir," he said to Mr. Crawford, his voice tinged with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. "I won't rest until I can create dishes as breathtaking as the ones I saw today." Mr. Crawford placed a hand on James' shoulder, a proud smile spreading across his face. "I have no doubt you'll get there, my boy. With Clara's guidance and your own passion, the sky is the limit." James nodded, his eyes shining with a newfound sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be long and arduous, but he was more determined than ever to see his culinary dreams come to fruition. This was his chance to truly make a name for himself, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. In the weeks that followed their move into the spacious new apartment, James found himself facing another exciting development in his burgeoning culinary journey. One afternoon, as he was diligently working through a series of knife skills exercises under Clara's watchful eye, Mr. Crawford paid an unexpected visit. "James, I have wonderful news," the businessman announced, his eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "I've secured you a spot at one of the finest culinary academies in the city." James felt his heart skip a beat, scarcely daring to believe what he was hearing. A spot at a renowned culinary school? It was the kind of opportunity he had only ever dreamed of, a chance to hone his skills and truly become the chef he aspired to be. I don't know what to say, sir," he stammered, his mind racing. That's incredible." Mr. Crawford chuckled warmly, clearly pleased by James' reaction. "And that's not all. I've arranged for a full scholarship to cover the tuition as well." Beside him, Clara stepped forward, a rare smile gracing her usually stern features. "James, this program is exceptionally rigorous, but I have no doubt you have what it takes to excel. The curriculum covers everything from advanced culinary techniques to food science and entrepreneurship." As Clara outlined the details of the comprehensive training program, James listened with rapt attention, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was his chance to truly make his dreams a reality, but he also knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging. Sensing his hesitation, Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know it seems daunting, but you've shown remarkable dedication and talent these past few months. With hard work and discipline, I believe you can accomplish great things." James nodded, his expression resolute. "I won't let you down, Clara, or you, Mr. Crawford. This is everything I've ever wanted, and I'm ready to give it my all." Eleanor, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of pride and disbelief, suddenly found herself overcome with emotion. She reached out to pull her son into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, James, my brave, brilliant boy," she whispered, her voice thick with joy. "This is all I've ever wanted for you. To see you have this chance, ... It's more than I could have ever imagined." James returned his mother's hug, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's because of you, Mom," he murmured. "Everything you've done, all the sacrifices you've made ... This is as much your victory as it is mine." Eleanor pulled back, cupping James' face in her weathered hands. "You've always been my greatest source of pride, James. And now, the world is going to see what an extraordinary young man you are." Turning to Mr. Crawford, Eleanor reached out to grasp the businessman's hand, her expression filled with profound gratitude. "I can never repay you for what you've done for us, but I promise you, we will make the most of this opportunity. James will make you proud, I know it." Mr. Crawford smiled warmly, giving Eleanor's hand a gentle squeeze. "I have no doubt about that, my dear. James is a remarkable young man, and I'm honored to be a part of his journey. This is merely the beginning of what I believe will be a long and illustrious culinary career." As the group exchanged heartfelt congratulations, the air in the apartment seemed to hum with a palpable sense of excitement and possibility. For James, the path toward his dreams had just been paved, and with the support of his mother and his newfound mentors, he was more determined than ever to seize this incredible opportunity. In the weeks that followed their move into the spacious new apartment, James found himself facing another exciting development in his burgeoning culinary journey. One afternoon, as he was diligently working through a series of knife skills exercises under Clara's watchful eye, Mr. Crawford paid an unexpected visit. "James, I have wonderful news," the businessman announced, his eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "I've secured you a spot at one of the finest culinary academies in the city." James felt his heart skip a beat, scarcely daring to believe what he was hearing. A spot at a renowned culinary school. It was the kind of opportunity he had only ever dreamed of, a chance to hone his skills and truly become the chef he aspired to be. I don't know what to say, sir," he stammered, his mind racing. That's ... That's incredible." Mr. Crawford chuckled warmly, clearly pleased by James' reaction. "And that's not all. I've arranged for a full scholarship to cover the tuition as well." Beside him, Clara stepped forward, a rare smile gracing her usually stern features. "James, this program is exceptionally rigorous, but I have no doubt you have what it takes to excel. The curriculum covers everything from advanced culinary techniques to food science and entrepreneurship." As Clara outlined the details of the comprehensive training program, James listened with rapt attention, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was his chance to truly make his dreams a reality, but he also knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging. When James returned home, he couldn't wait to share the news with his mother. As soon as he stepped through the door, he found Eleanor in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal. "Mom, you'll never believe what happened today," he exclaimed, his face alight with excitement. Eleanor turned, a questioning look on her face. "What is it, James? What's got you so worked up?" "Mr. Crawford," James paused, taking a deep breath to steady his racing heart. "He's gotten me a full scholarship to one of the top culinary schools in the city." Eleanor's eyes widened in disbelief, and she stopped stirring the pot on the stove. "A scholarship? But how is that possible?" James quickly explained everything: Mr. Crawford's generosity, Clara's enthusiasm for the program, and the incredible opportunity that lay ahead of him. As he spoke, he could see the emotions playing across his mother's face, a mix of joy, pride, and overwhelming gratitude. "Oh, James," Eleanor cried, setting down the spoon and rushing to embrace her son. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she held him tight. This is more than I ever could have hoped for you." James returned the hug, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's all because of you, Mom," he murmured. "Everything you've done, all the sacrifices you've made, this is your victory too." That evening, after James had shared the news, Eleanor insisted on calling Mr. Crawford herself. With a trembling hand, she dialed the number, her heart racing. "Mr. Crawford," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is Eleanor Harris. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for my son." On the other end of the line, Mr. Crawford chuckled warmly. "My dear Eleanor, the thanks are entirely unnecessary. Seeing the joy on your faces is all the reward I need." Eleanor sniffled, wiping at the tears that threatened to spill over. "But how can we ever repay you? This opportunity is beyond anything we could have imagined." "Simply focus on making the most of it," Mr. Crawford replied. "That is all I ask. I have no doubt that James will flourish under Clara's tutelage and go on to achieve great things." "Thank you, Mr. Crawford," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." As she hung up the phone, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. Their lives had been transformed in ways she could scarcely believe, all thanks to the generosity and faith of one remarkable man. With James' future now firmly set on the path of his culinary dreams, she knew that the future held endless possibilities. The crisp, white fabric of the chef's uniform draped neatly over James' lean frame as he moved with growing confidence through the bustling culinary classroom. Gone were the days when he had stood meekly in the corner, scrubbing dishes and dreaming of one day joining the ranks of the culinary elite. Now, he was a student with a rare opportunity to learn from the best. With each passing day, James' skills had blossomed under Clara's tutelage. The rhythmic chopping of his knife, the delicate touch with which he seasoned his creations all spoke to the dedication and passion he poured into his work. No longer did he simply observe the chefs in the restaurant kitchen now. He was one of them, meticulously executing the techniques he had once only admired from afar. As the class progressed through a series of increasingly complex challenges, James found himself rising to meet each new task with unwavering determination. He savored the weight of the knife in his hand, the fragrance of fresh herbs, the sizzle of expertly seared proteins. This was his element, his calling, and he was determined to prove himself worthy of the opportunity that had been so graciously bestowed upon him. It was on one such day, as James was carefully plating a dish of his own creation, that the door to the classroom swung open, and in strode Mr. Crawford and Clara, twin expressions of pride and curiosity on their faces. James felt a surge of nerves, but also a deep sense of gratitude for the two individuals who had so profoundly changed the course of his life. With a steadying breath, he presented his dish, explaining each component and the thought process behind its execution. As Mr. Crawford and Clara sampled the carefully crafted flavors, James watched their expressions intently, his heart pounding in his chest. Would he have lived up to their lofty expectations? Had he done justice to the faith they had placed in him? The answer came in the form of warm smiles and approving nods, and James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was not just a momentary triumph, but the first step in a journey toward realizing his culinary dreams that now seemed within reach, thanks to the unwavering support of those who had chosen to invest in him. As James stood in the gleaming kitchen, his crisp white uniform a stark contrast to the worn apron he had once worn as a humble dishwasher, he couldn't help but reflect on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this point. Not long ago, his days had been filled with the endless cycle of school and work, a relentless grind just to make ends meet. But now, as he gazed around the state-of-the-art facility, surrounded by the buzzing energy of his fellow culinary students, James couldn't help but marvel at how much his life had changed. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he thought of his mother, Eleanor, and the unbridled pride that had shone in her eyes when he had first shared the news of his scholarship. Gone were the days of worry and struggle, replaced by a newfound sense of security and optimism. James knew that his success was as much a testament to his mother's unwavering strength and resilience as it was to his own determination. And then there was Mr. Crawford, the man whose generosity had set this whole journey in motion. As James recalled their first fateful encounter in the restaurant, the memory of the businessman's sharp gaze and unwavering faith still resonated within him. It was a testament to the power of taking a chance on someone, of seeing the potential in even the most unlikely of individuals. Now, as James prepared to embark on the next phase of his culinary education, he could feel the weight of Mr. Crawford's and Clara's expectations resting squarely on his shoulders. But rather than feeling burdened, he was invigorated, driven by a deep sense of purpose and a burning desire to prove himself worthy of the opportunities that had been laid before him. Clara, the formidable chef who had taken him under her wing, observed James with a keen eye, her expression unreadable. But James could sense the underlying pride and belief in his abilities, and it fueled his determination to excel. "You've come so far, James," she said, her voice tinged with a rare softness. "And I have no doubt that you will continue to reach new heights. The culinary world is yours for the taking." James nodded, his gaze steady and resolute. "I won't let you down, Clara, or Mr. Crawford. This is my chance to truly make my dreams a reality, and I'm going to give it everything I have." As he turned his attention back to the task at hand, James felt a surge of confidence course through him. The road ahead may be long and arduous, but he was more determined than ever to see his culinary ambitions come to fruition. With the unwavering support of those who had believed in him, the future had never seemed brighter. The kitchen hummed with the familiar sounds that had become James' sanctuary: the sizzle of pans, the rhythmic chopping of knives, the occasional murmur of conversation between his classmates. But as he stood before the gleaming counter, his gaze fixed intently on the dish he was carefully preparing, a sense of exhilaration and purpose filled him. This was no mere school assignment, no routine exercise in technique and flavor profiles. No, this was a chance for James to truly unleash his culinary creativity, to meld the skills he had honed under Clara's guidance with the boundless imagination that had always been his greatest strength. With each carefully placed component, each artful flourish, James felt his passion for the craft grow ever stronger. The rich, savory aromas, the vibrant colors, the delicate balance of textures, it was as if he was painting a culinary masterpiece. Every stroke of the spatula and twist of the wrist a deliberate brushstroke in the creation of something extraordinary. As he stepped back to admire his handiwork, a small smile tugged at the corners of James' mouth. This was only the beginning, he knew, the first of many such culinary challenges he would face as he continued his journey toward realizing his dreams. But the sense of pride and fulfillment he felt in this moment was unlike anything he had experienced before. In the distance, he could see the familiar figures of Mr. Crawford and Clara approaching, expressions of curiosity and anticipation upon their faces. James took a deep, steadying breath, eager to present his creation and to see the reactions of the two individuals who had done so much to make this moment possible. As the seasoned chef and the wealthy businessman sampled the dish, James watched their faces intently, searching for any hint of approval or critique. But when they both looked up at him with beaming smiles, he knew that he had truly outdone himself, that he had taken a giant leap forward in his culinary development. This was not the end, but merely a new beginning, a stepping stone toward the realization of his ultimate dream. One day, James knew he would open his own restaurant, a place where he could showcase his talents and share his passion for the culinary arts with the world. And with the unwavering support of those who had believed in him, he was more determined than ever to make that dream a reality. As he gazed around the bustling kitchen, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose and possibility, James knew that the future had never looked brighter. He was no longer just a boy with a dream, but a young chef on the cusp of greatness, poised to leave an indelible mark on the culinary landscape.